back again, taking a look at the very last part of this and how to actually develop your comics with your students in regards to character development, focusing a little bit more on plotline, and having your students create their actual comics. Thanks again. Hi, and welcome back here. Right now we're going to be taking a look at another graphic organizer. So at this point your students have already completed the whole beginning, middle, end graphic organizer. They've moved on, they've taken those ideas from the beginning, middle, end graphic organizer, they've put them onto the rough draft of the comic experience, and they wrote the character, the setting, they included information about like the sentence that they wrote, it got transferred. Also, they were able to create a panel, include the dialogue that it entailed. This is the very next portion, so your students have gone through that. At this point in time, we're already starting to work on building your students' own comic. So right here, what I've created is just a really, again, easy graphic organizer. If you had a sheet of paper, you would just have them create a trifold so that you broke it into 3 sections. Here we've got protagonist, here we've got a resource, here we've got an antagonist. And this is typically how I go through it in class. So what you want your students to do is create a list of different names that could serve as a protagonist. And these are just a few examples: Native Americans, dragons, cowboys, the list goes on. Your students can be really creative here in what they come up with. We want them to get really close to about 10 ideas for each category. The reason why we go with 10 ideas is because the first few are the easiest. The last few that we create, once we get down here to about 8, 9, 10, the ideas it's a lot harder to think of ideas, and because of that, oftentimes the last ideas tend to be some of the best ones that your students are going to create. So again, the first few ideas come really easily, the last ones entail more thinking, and they tend to be the best. So you want to go through that for your students, have them create a list of 10 protagonists. You would explain what the protagonist is, move on to the resource. Again, a list of 10 ideas for a resource: land, the mountain of doom, the dungeon, a jungle, the gold amulet, the silver ring, the gold sword. Those are just random ideas. From there, again, a list of 10. And then here for the antagonist, again, a list of 10. So here we had the Europeans, here we had the Skywalkers, here you might talk about the little monsters, tons of different ideas for you to include there. After that, you want to have your students take their pencil, circle one of them. So say I circled the dragon with the mountain of doom and the Skywalker. They can completely mix it up. Say it was dragons, land, and Skywalkers. From there, what you would do is have them turn the page over, so now they would be looking at the back of their paper, and take the protagonist that they had circled, write it up at the top. So now instead of protagonist, mine would be dragons. Instead of my writing the word resource, I would have the mountain of doom. Instead of Skywalkers, or instead of the antagonist, I would place Skywalkers there. Right around 2/3 of the way down the paper, I would draw a line right across the bottom there and write the word drawings right above it. This section is reserved for drawings of the dragons, drawings of the mountain of doom, drawings of the Skywalkers. It's kind of like the room to sketch and be creative with how they want their characters to look or how they want their resource to appear. Right in this section, we're going to take that same idea of adding bullets. So we're just going to go down the list, add a few. It depends how many topics you want to give them to write about here. As I was going through this, one of the very first things I might say is something along the lines of, "Okay, class, tell me, basically explain to me what your character looks like." So under dragons, they might say, "Oh, the dragon, it's green, it has scales, it has a long tail, really sharp teeth." So just details they're listing. It doesn't have to be a complete sentence because they're describing. Here, mountain of doom again. Oh, maybe the mountain of doom is like 1,000 feet tall. It spills lava. You can't walk inside it because it's really hot. Over here, the Skywalkers, they're people with wings. They can fly, they soar, and they live in the mountains. Here, maybe tell a little bit about what are their likes. So what are the likes of the dragons? What things do they like? You could say they like to sing songs and hang out around a campfire as they roast marshmallows with their hot, flaming breath. The Mountain of Doom, it gets a little trickier here because you're giving certain characteristics to something that may not easily have those. So if it doesn't apply, feel free to skip this part and move on to here. For Skywalkers, what are their likes? They love to go out late at night and soar above in the nighttime sky because they can see the beautiful stars. That's a like. Moving on, dislikes. So what are their dislikes? Now the dragons dislike, maybe you could say they dislike mean people. Here, Skywalkers, what do they dislike? They dislike it when people enter their space in the air. From there, think of maybe what are some of their pet peeves or what are some of their vices. Explain for the dragons, explain for the Skywalkers, and the list goes on. You can get a really good idea as to a whole bunch of different things you could include for each bullet in the lesson plan section. It's set under the lesson plan of the rough draft, so the rough draft lesson plan. And after you go through this part, you want to have your students create their real quick sketches. So this is essentially a character development. Here, after you've gone through the character development, they're drawing and sketching and getting a really good idea as to what those characters and what that resource might look like. Then, again, we're moving on. So now we've developed our characters, we know what they're going to look like. Hey, what do you know? We come back to our beginning, middle, end graphic organizer. Now is the part where they're going to start introducing their protagonist, introduce antagonist, talk about what's going on in the story, introduce some type of problem right around here, and basically from here on out we follow our basic plot line. Here we know we've got rising action, it's coming into the end in this category. Right around here it might get solved and it's coming on down. So it would look something like this kind of a line. Straight up and back down here. And from here, once your students start this, remember, begin with the very first bullet and the last bullet. Once you have those done, your job, the job of the student, so to say, is to go in and fill in the gaps. Everything, they're writing out the story here. This is going to take them a little bit of time, maybe a day or two at most. From there, once you finish this, you want to move on and have them transfer the ideas to the rough draft of the comic experience. It's exactly the same thing we did with Mrs. Chicken and Mrs. Alligator. And at this point in time, they're going to be flowing with all of the ideas. You'll see that the class is running really smoothly as they're transitioning from this graphic organizer to the rough draft. And that's basically it. Thanks a lot, guys, for listening, and tune in. We'll keep you posted with what else is coming. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in again, guys. I know we've covered a great deal of material and content. Throughout the day, we reviewed the exquisite story. That was the story that you had your students write, where you gave them the prompts they passed their paper on, and actually at the very end, took a bunch of random ideas, put them together, and created one solid story. From there, we moved into the game Simon Says, and we used that to teach key vocabulary. For example, dialogue was one of them. We showed the gesture. From there we moved into Mrs. Chicken and Mrs. Alligator, told the story of it. If you're interested in the script or the story, you can find it in the lesson plan of the rough draft. Also, after telling the story, we moved into the beginning, middle, end graphic organizer. We started with the first bullet, ended with the last bullet, had them fill in the gaps in between. Then we moved on to the graphic organizer that was basically a blank sheet of paper, had them create a trifold where they wrote the protagonist at the top, the resource also, and finally the antagonist, and then they created a list of 10 each. They circled their favorite ones, flipped the paper over, put those names at the top, and then we got into a character development with those ideas. Then at the very bottom section, we had left a little space so that they could sketch out their characters and what that looked like, as well as their resource. At the very end of everything, we had the students moving on to the actual rough draft
of the comic experience, where they were actually putting the information that they had already created onto the rough draft. They were writing things like the character, the setting, then they were including their sentence, and from there they were also creating the comic panel itself. Thank you very much for tuning in, and stay tuned for the third phase of the comic experience, which will be coming up soon. Thanks again.